Oh, so I looked at the video from last week, and we were kind of like all over the place. And after seeing the video, and actually after hearing from some people about how we were all over the place, I think what we should do is to give us some structure. Read a stanza, describe what the stanza is saying, and then we can discuss that. Then we'll read another stanza and describe what, so that we all progress,
Right,
instead of going off in all kinds of different directions, which is perfectly normal.
right.
I think what we forget is that according to Buddhism, since beginningless time, we have had this wrong view, this misconception of how things exist. So when we hear this stuff, we have to hear it several times. I have to hear it several times.
Yeah.
I came to a conclusion about the Chittamatra system that I had never come to before, after finally finishing this chapter on the debate between the Prasangika and Chittamatras. I was like, wow, I never even realized that, thought that, because our minds are so habituated to another view. It's very difficult for us to
Switch it.
grasp this. So we should take the time. We should listen to it, and then we really, if there are questions, we should discuss it. All right. So I will quickly go through the prayers today, without any explanations. And for those of you who don't know what these prayers mean, just let it wash over you, and understand that it is nothing but talking about being of benefit to all sentient beings, so that all sentient beings can achieve happiness. That's what all these prayers are about in the Mahayana system. Okay. So taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, and we'll do it in the Tibetan prayer version. Sangye chedang soki chotnam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi Daki chenyan gibe sonam ki Rola penchir sangye druparsho Sangye chedang soki chotnam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi jinso gipe sonam gi Rola penchir sangye druparsho Sangye chodang soki chodang la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi jinso gipe sonam ki Rola penchir sangye drupa.
And we can continue to say Chinyan.
Yeah, I was just going to remind people, I'm saying Jinso because Geshe Nima asked me to, because that means
He's teaching.
through the positive potential, like right by teaching.
Right,
As opposed
And
to
we're
listening.
going to say.
right.
Yeah.
By listening
Yeah.
to the teaching.
So that's good. Just Geshe Nima asked me to do that. All right.
So don't be led by Christopher at that point.
Yeah.
I don't understand. All right. 4 measurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Then we go to the 7-limb prayer on the next page. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds with every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And the mandala offered. Sajiperki juching meto Tramri rabling Nidegen pati Sangye jingdu migderu wagi Nanda chinda chunvashu Idam Guru Radhamandalakam Niryataya. And then we have the Yadamra Hetu prayer. I will just quickly read the English translation of the Sanskrit mantra. Those phenomena which arise from a cause, the Buddha has declared their cause, and that which is the cessation of them. Thus, the great Buddha has taught. May the Buddha's blessing be with this mantra. Om ye dharma hetu prabhava, hetu tesham tathagato yavadat, tesham cha yo niroda, evam vadi mahashramanana svo. And then stanza 5 of the wisdom chapter, the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom of the middle way.
Oh.
By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconception, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. And that is directly related to what we're talking about today. Our misconceptions, our elaborations.
Sorry, guys.
Hi.
You want us, this is, and you're welcome to.
Okay. So as I said last week, we just basically just kind of got started on this. You know, we didn't really get very far because we had a lot of discussion came up. Yeah. So again, I'll say what we're going to do is I'll read the stanza, I'll give the explanation from the commentaries, and then we can discuss it. If we have questions about it, if we have anything that arises about that, what we just talked about, then we discuss that, and then we'll move on to the next one. And I have tried my darndest to make these terms and these terms as clear as possible for us. But you know, when I reread these things after I've put them together, I go, oh, I need to change that, I need to change that. So I've been doing that. So we'll just, you know, we're doing our best.
It's all we can do.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're on, we're talking about the Chittamatra school of tenets as compared to the Prasangika school of tenets. They are the two highest schools of tenets. They're the Mahayana schools of tenets, which means the Mahayana is the path that takes you all the way to enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. And initially, the Chittamatra and Prasangika seem kind of close in their view, and the differences are very subtle, but once you really go into those differences, they become fundamentally huge.
Christopher, can you just remind us, I know we went over it last week, the subtle difference again?
Well, that's why I'm just going to do it again,
Gotcha,
because
gotcha,
I reworded some things already, because this is not making sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. So we're on stanza 15, and this is a section, the new section that begins with the sort of the debate or the discourse between Chittamatra and Prasangika. Here's the stanza. When the causal stream is severed, even relative phenomena do not appear. So the causal stream that's at the root of cyclic existence is the mental continuum or the mind stream of the deluded consciousness that sees things as existing inherently. So the deluded consciousness or continuum is ignorant of the actual nature of reality. The actual nature of reality is everything is interconnected, interdependent, and arising dependently that way. But since beginningless time, we've had a mistaken view. We think it is independently self-existent, and therefore it's very difficult for us to hear this properly. Okay. So it's this diluted continuum grasps onto the inherent independent self-existence of both the self and all phenomena. So when we're talking about the self, we're not even talking about our body. We're talking about this idea of a person, me,
Right.
something that we think exists sort of separate from the body and even the mind, because we'll say my body, my mind, as if there's a me. So this me it's very important to us. And so what we have to see to cut through is this idea that we have that the me actually exists independently, inherently, as well as all phenomena. As long as the consciousness is diluted, there's no possibility of the consciousness being liberated from the suffering of cyclic existence. So as long as we have the wrong view, as long as we're deluded about how things exist, we are going to keep going around in cyclic existence, because we're not severing the causal stream of samsara. Once the causal mind stream of delusional consciousness is cut off and discontinued, the phenomena of cyclic existence will not appear at all. Even conventionally, it won't appear. It'll just vanish. Cyclic existence, when every sentient being diluted continuum of consciousness becomes enlightened, I guess you could say, or non-diluted, pure, non-diluted, samsara will just cease to exist. There won't even be the appearance of samsara. It will just be,
But will existence like you said,
existence,
cyclic
yeah,
existence
no.
appears.
Cyclic existence appears, but existence does not
That's
appear.
important,
Yes.
because I'm thinking poof.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
So, okay.
Right. There is existence. It's not just poof, everything's gone.
Yeah.
It's not like nihilism. That's
Yes.
a problem.
Right.
Many Buddhist students fall into is
Yes.
they think it's just going to nihilism. So
Right.
they fluctuate between nihilism and permanism.
No, yeah, it just doesn't exist like this.
Right. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in a way that causes suffering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which
Whether-
is the basic thing of the
Which is what cyclic
suffering,
existence
and then
is.
you go to
Yeah.
wrong view. Then you
Right.
go back to the basic wrong view, but this is
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so let's,
Yeah.
let me just get through this part. Okay, so since the proponents of the highest Prasangika Madhyamika school of tenets deny that any phenomena can exist independently, can have any kind of self-inherent existence, for them then, for the Prasangikas, what they call a deceived mind is a mind that perceives all phenomena, consciousness, form, sound, and so forth, as if they really existed the way they appear to. The way they appear to us. I mean, if you just look around, everything sort of appears as it exists separately, kind of independently from one another. We think that our consciousnesses exist separately. They're kind of like locked inside this body of ours, which we think is different, separate from all the other bodies. So a deluded, according to the Prasangikas, I'll say that again, a deceived mind, and they're saying we have a deceived mind up till now. A deceived mind is one that perceives all phenomena, consciousness, form, sound, and so forth, as if they really existed in the way they appear, inherently and independently. In addition, the Prasangikas say that the deluded continuum of consciousness, which is at the root of cyclic existence and the suffering of cyclic existence, is itself, that consciousness, that continuum of consciousness, is itself completely lacking in any kind of independent self-existence. According to the Prasangikas, the view that phenomena have an inherent or independent self-existence is erroneous and false. So that's the Prasangika. Any questions about that? Prasangika's view.
Wrong and false.
It's wrong and false. But what exactly is wrong and false? What's the wrong and false thing?
The way they observe it, the way they're viewing it.
And how do we observe it and view it as
As
sentient?
if it were real, as if it existed from its own side.
Yes, independently,
Independent,
self-existing.
separate.
Remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're gonna go to the Chittamatra and how they look at it. In contrast, the proponents of the Chittamatra system do assert that there is inherent existence, and that inherent existence is an inherently existing consciousness or mind. Okay? And they call that consciousness or mind the mind basis of all. They have a term for it, mind basis of all. And they say that mind basis of all does exist inherently. Remember, Prasangika says nothing, even consciousness, even the continuum of consciousness, does not exist inherently. Okay, Chittamatra says it does. So, for the Chittamatras, all right, no, I'll read what's here. The phenomena that appear to the mind as externally arising forms, sounds, and so forth, exist in the mind or the consciousness only, according to the Chittamatras. For them, then, a mind that is deceived is a mind that perceives all phenomena except for the mind itself, as if they really existed out there, externally, apart from the mind. So you understand the difference now, what Prasangika says is a deceived consciousness and what Chittamatra says is a deceived consciousness?
No.
I thought not, because it's so subtle and it's so out of our mode of thinking, we don't even get it.
So the Chittamatra are saying that the only thing that is interdependent, or that is independent and exists from its own side, is a stream of consciousness or the mind.
Is the mind, the consciousness.
And that's it.
And that's it. And then it says, it is and that everything that appears to be externally and separate in the way it looks to us actually exists only in the mind.
So if the mind
Doesn't
can't-
exist apart from the mind.
Right, so if the mind doesn't see it, then it doesn't exist. Or it's not there. I don't
So no,
Yeah.
so
know.
right.
Yeah.
So what the Chittamatrins are saying is a deceived mind is the one that looks at everything that appears to be external
Yeah,
and thinks that it actually exists out there. But when in reality, it's only existing in the mind itself and as an appearance of the mind itself.
well, and an example of that could be, let's say I've had a negative experience with a person, but someone else with that same person. Let's say you and I had a negative experience, but you and Merritt has a positive experience, right? Interacting with you. So in my mind, Christopher is a bad person because this is the experience I've had with Christopher. But Merritt's experience with you was positive. Oh, Christopher's a wonderful person. So in my mind, you are appearing not to be, or whatever. No.
Let me say no.
Okay.
What you're describing is the Prasangika view of what a deceived consciousness is. A deceived
So,
mind
Yeah.
thinks that the Merritt and me and Brian and you and that appear to us exist independently, self-existent. So if I say something you don't like, you think that's the way I am.
Right.
If I say something Merritt likes, Merritt thinks that's the way I am, because we see things, all phenomena, as being independently self-existent, that they are really as they appear to be.
Okay.
The Chittamatra view is that they're not out there at all. It's all happening in the mind. It's all happening in the mind. So in other words,
I'm just sitting here. in
my-
an
my-
empty room.
the appearance of me,
not your mind or
Tracy, in
my
other
mind.
words,
Right.
the appearance of me saying something that you don't like is happening in your own mind.
Right.
It's
not
you
even-
doing
right.
it. And what Chittamatra is saying, the
Yes.
reason we're deceived is that we think it is me doing it. It is out there externally. Do you see the
Yes,
difference?
they-
It's not
yes.
my mind that's thinking, it's like we're all having our experience, but it's like this bigger existence of mind, which does exist independently, that is having
And that's what
the experience.
Chittamatra,
That's
that's what Chittamatra says. However, remember, Prasangikas says the mind, the consciousness does not exist independently.
Right.
Does not exist
I'm
inherently.
not gonna think
It
of
is a dependent arising.
So be careful.
it's your school.
Because, no. You use the word inherently and independently. So,
Right.
so when you talk about emptiness, you talk about nothing exists independently.
That's right.
Correct.
Nothing exists inherently either. It's inherently
But
existing.
you just say the mind exists inherently.
Chittamatra says
Chittamatra
the
school
mind
says that.
That's
exists
the one that
inherently.
we're kind of following. right?
That's right. But we're talking about the
I
discourse
get
between the
it.
two.
We're talking about the difference between the two. I get that.
Right.
I
Yeah.
understand the difference. I'm
Right.
just saying that from our Gaelic tradition. And the school, we're following the highest school,
Mhm.
middle way,
Mhm.
which is, I thought, the Chittamatra. school.
No,
No, the highest is the
the
Prasangika.
Prasangika. The highest is the Prasangika.
The
Okay.
Prasangika view refutes and undoes the
The
Chittamatra view.
Chittamatra view.
But we have to find this out for ourselves.
No, but then
We have to come to the
Then
conclusion.
this doesn't make any sense anymore.
Well, right, because the Chittamatra school, the Prasangika school shows, and that's why we're following the Prasangika school, that the Chittamatra's view of the consciousness existing independently is not a correct view.
Right.
But didn't I just hear somebody say,
Let me finish. Go ahead. Say, no, I want to hear what you have to say.
You might have, we're all confused, we're all confused.
the Prasangikan school, I thought you just said, does believe that things do exist.
No, Chittamatra.
No. Go ahead.
Okay,
That things do exist independently as they appear.
No. The Prasangika school says that things actually exist interdependently and are dependent arisings, but they appear to us as if they exist independently. And that's where we are mistaken.
Okay, so in the Prasangika school, then the mind does not exist independently either.
Correct, because the mind arises from previous moments of the mind. It is a dependent arising. The mind can change. We can
Right.
change our mind. If our mind was inherently, independently self-existing, there would be nothing that would change our mind.
right,
Because we would be independently self-existing. Nothing could actually affect us or influence us. Our mind couldn't change. This is key. But the Prasangikas are saying because the mind, the consciousness itself is a dependent arising, moment to moment to moment. External influences can affect it and it can change. This is why we can actually traverse the path to enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. Why it's possible. Because our consciousness is impermanent. It is not independently self-existing.
And
Okay.
so.
And that's Prasangika's view.
And when that view, if everyone gets that view, and there's no more cyclic existence, there is existence
Yes.
from this school.
Yes.
There is existence.
Yes.
yeah.
But it's just different than it's
Than what
different.
we're
Yes.
In the
experiencing.
other school, if it's mind that causes everything or the appearance of everything.
And the mind itself is
minds-
inherently
and it's
independent.
independent. So if it's independent, so if the mind stops, but that's not an issue. I'm just saying if it's independent, without the mind, from that school, nothing exists.
Mhm.
correct.
But in the other school, without mind as we understand it, there is existence. We just
Yeah, with
don't know what it is.
with an interdependently interdependently existing mind, everything exists.
Right.
So Prasangika would say, this all exists.
Yes.
It does exist.
Yeah.
It just
Conventional.
because we're mistaken in our view that we think it exists independently and separately from everything else, we are deceived by the appearance.
Right.
What is the Dalai Lama?
What does he say?
Yeah,
He's with
He's-
Prasangikas.
okay,
Everybody's
yeah,
with
it's,
Prasangikas in the Gelek tradition.
Yeah.
so I get it in moments, I get little flashes of getting it, and then if even formulating a question or trying to articulate,
Right.
it's like.
I know.
Just don't speak, or don't,
I know.
don't try to articulate it, but I get little flashes,
Right.
like, okay,
I got it.
you
I
know,
know.
I got it,
I
but it's
don't
like,
got it.
I can't quite.
Kamita and I have been studying this stuff for 17 plus years. I have to read and reread and go over these, like the commentaries themselves look like they're written in code.
Right.
I'm getting a lot out of this, and I really credit Geshe Nima for saying, do this,
Yeah.
because it's really expanding my understanding.
So I have a question that does relate to this,
Yeah,
I believe. And if it doesn't, just say next, just
Yeah.
delete.
Uh.
But that is the viewpoint that, when you hear people studying Buddhism saying, nothing is real, nothing, none of this is real.
mhm.
Is that more of the other school
Yes.
that's saying, poof, it's like it's not
Yes.
real, and
Yes.
and
When you hear people,
got it.
when people say, "Oh, it's all an illusion, therefore it doesn't matter," that's the
Got it.
Chittamatra
Okay.
view.
That's, yes,
Well,
okay,
yeah,
I get, and I'm, okay. Yep,
Chittamatra.
should I,
Remember,
Because
Chittamatra is lower than Prasangika.
Right.
Chittamatra hasn't
got it,
understood.
That everything does exist conventionally, it's just our view of it is mistaken in
Yeah.
how it exists.
Yeah.
It's not independent, it's interdependent.
Right.
I'm going with this school. It's like, just,
I mean, there's something about us all that we like the idea that everything's an illusion. Therefore, all this bad stuff we see, it's not really there. We
Right.
kind of like that idea.
Well, the challenge, I think, is unfortunately, sometimes to teach the concept, they say it is like an illusion or like magic, and so you kind of, okay.
Yes.
And again, it's this language issue where, you have to be very careful the word you use to describe a particular thing, and in many cases, there's not an English word that faithfully
That translates,
actually
yeah.
translates the
Yes,
that meaning of the word. So
I completely agree. It's like,
that's part of the challenge, is trying to.
it is the challenge. It
Yeah.
is the challenge.
I would
To
argue,
find a
I'm
way.
not sure that some of these, and again, I'm just saying this not to be anything other than practical. You have to have some belief that the commentaries that are written are accurate and interpret the philosophy correctly as well.
Right.
Right.
But there's no guarantee that that's actually completely.
What they always will do then is they'll go back to the source. They'll go back to the Buddha's own sutras, that were the Mahayana ones. And they will check it and double check it. And so the tradition of these Buddhist schools is very they're very, very thorough. They're very, very particular. They're very strict in how they interpret these things. And that's why they debate. That's why debate exists. It's like what we're doing right now. They can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and go, here's the actual real conclusion
Right.
based on what the Buddha has said, not what we have been thinking since beginningless time. And therefore we're sort of imposing a mistaken view onto the Dharma,
Right.
and we don't even realize we're doing it. Which is why, like you said, the words are extremely important. I mean, Geshe Nima said to me, find words that Americans are going to understand.
Right.
Because some of the terms, as as all of you have read some of the terms in these things, you go, what does that mean?
Right. Because a lot of the words they use to interpret are words that we don't necessarily use every day in
Right.
our language. They're part of the language, but we don't use them.
But at the
And then we have this-
monasteries, they use these words.
Right.
Right, and they know what they mean. That Shantideva knew what these words meant, and so did all the other monks.
Right.
But when it's translated into English for the average layperson, they go, that's some highfalutin word, I don't know what that's talking about.
right,
You know, so,
and then it gets lost in translation.
all right. All right, so thus, for different reasons,
Yes.
the Prasangikas and the Chittamatrins come to the same conclusion that consciousnesses are mistaken about the way things appear. But their reasoning is completely different. Here, I just wrote this morning, so I'm going to have to read it. This is, based on what I've been, so the Chittamatrins, the conclusion they come to, the Chittamatrins affirm the inherent existence of the mind, but deny the existence of external things. They deny that phenomena have any nature other than the mind and don't actually exist out there as they appear to. Is that clear? We already went through this, but
Yeah.
you have to do it a few
Yeah.
times.
It's,
All right.
I think.
Here's how the Prasangikas, so the
Yeah.
Chittamatrins then conclude that consciousness is mistaken about the way things appear to them, to the consciousness, because the consciousness thinks that
Right.
everything's really out there when it's only in the mind.
Say that?
That's Chittamatra.
They'll say exactly what you said.
The Chittamatrins say that consciousness is mistaken about the way things appear because consciousness thinks everything exists out there externally the way it seems to appear. When Chittamatra says, no, it's only existing in the mind. That's where it is. Okay, that's why the Chittamatrins say a mind is deceived in terms of how things appear. That's
I'm
why.
sorry, I'm confused.
Right, I know, it's not, Brian, I know, it's because this is
No,
not.
it's I'm confused because I thought I just heard you say not too long ago that the Chittamatrins
Mhm.
believe that things do exist independently as they appear.
No, those
No,
are the
no, no.
Prasangikas.
The consciousness,
No,
the Chittamatrins believe the consciousness exists independent.
No, not independently, sorry. All right, say that again, Brian.
well, I thought you said that the difference between the Chittamatrins and the Prasangikas is that the Chittamatrins believe that the mind exists inherently
Yes,
and that things do exist as they appear, whereas the Prasangikas believe that everything exists interdependently. There's nothing that exists nothing exists independently.
Right.
Yeah. So
let him finish.
Yeah.
so I'm just trying to keep all these things you're saying as I hear them. Maybe my mind is not focused today appropriately.
Okay, do you want me to tell you what the mistake that I heard and what you said?
Yeah,
Everything was correct, except
Yep.
you said the Chittamatrins say, and this was correct, the Chittamatrins say that the mind itself exists inherently.
Right.
And that everything that appears to be out there existing
Mhm.
only exists in the mind. So it actually does not appear
No, I
the
didn't
way
say
it is.
that.
Right.
I know,
It was in
but
the-
what I'm saying, but it actually does not appear, exist the way it appears.
So
Because the way it appears from the Chittamatran point of view is that it actually exists out there externally. So the Chittamatras are saying the mistake is that the mind thinks that things do exist out there the way they appear when they don't. The way things exist is that they're in the mind itself. It's an appearance in the mind itself.
That's a Chittamantra.
That's the
view.
Chittamatra view, and that the mind itself is inherently.
But both
Existing.
schools believe that what we see out there is it's
Is
not
mistaken.
correct.
We're mistaken in the
That's
way,
mistake.
in the way we
Yeah,
perceive it.
Right.
Yeah.
So they both come to the same conclusion, but for different
But
reasons.
I just want to clarify, the conclusion they're coming to is that it's mistaken.
That's what I'm
period.
saying, that's
Yeah,
the same
That's the
conclusion.
extent of their.
That is the same conclusion, that it's mistaken, that our view of the way things exist is mistaken.
They do not agree on the
On
manner of
how.
a mistake.
Right.
How that happens, yes,
Right.
right. That's correct. Yes, Kavita, that is correct. So do you understand yet.
Well, I understand what you just said, but I thought I heard you say something different, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So if the mind, it does exist in the Chittamatrin view
Yes,
independently,
yes,
you're arguing that then it could never change and therefore it's an incur, even if they believe all the other stuff that the Prasangikas believe, it's still this fact that they believe the mind exists independently that can't be reality.
yeah, so then anything that is actually changing is what's just occurring within the mind. It's not, there's nothing else.
Doesn't exist.
The mind, and the mind
So,
is inherently existent.
so then in the Prasangika, the mind doesn't exist inherently or
Correct.
independently.
Correct, correct,
So it's a dependent arising or.
yes,
Okay. But,
Causal conditions of preceding moments.
but then how does a mind, so how does a mind that doesn't exist independently matter in terms of whether something else exists independently or not? I don't know if I worded
Right.
that question correctly.
the fact that a mind or anything else doesn't exist independently doesn't mean that it therefore does not exist.
Right,
Its mode of existence is not independent.
okay,
Its mode of existence is interdependent and dependently arising. It therefore, it does exist. It does, Prasangika says, things exist. The things we're, hearing and seeing and touching and smelling, they exist, but they don't exist the way we think they
yeah,
do,
I get that.
Yeah. as separate, independent, permanent.
If the wave in the ocean exists,
Mhm.
Right,
you wouldn't say.
Yeah,
it
you
doesn't
say the
exist.
wave, of course, exists, but you can't grab it
right,
and say, here's the wave, let's
And
like
it's
put it
also
in a
the
box.
right.
Yeah.
And it's all, it's connected to the ocean. There's so many things.
Yeah.
We talked about this, yeah.
And that's, yeah, because like the mind, it, is like the wave in the sense that it is made up of a preceding moment that caused it to shift and change and then formulate the curve, and then something might shift and change again in the mind and change the view, and therefore something could happen to the wave and change it and it never develops.
So it's like a sine wave,
Yeah,
it's moving, it's changing, it's up and down, and according to the Buddhist view, the mind can then set a trajectory that is based on reality and actually get all the way to complete enlightenment and end suffering completely. Now, this is what the Buddha is saying, but unless we understand how that occurs and why, we're just going to think that sounds like magic, and that we're not capable of doing it.
right.
And that's the true bodhisattvas.
That's true,
That
but yeah, that's the Bodhisattva
the
path.
Bodhisattva.
That Bodhisattva path is that path to complete enlightenment for the benefit of all beings.
so then in the Prasangika, everything is in the mind.
Chittamatra.
Chittamatra, everything is in mind.
Remember, chitta
It means mind only.
Chitta means mind. Chitta means mind or heart, because with the mind, they say the mind is here, the chitta. This is why bodhicitta, awakened mind, awakened
But
mind.
again,
So Chittamatra is mind only.
well, but so is Prasangika. It's not, maybe not definitionally mind only, but everything is in the mind.
But the
The
mind,
mind is a key element.
No.
the mind is a key element, of course.
I understand what you're saying.
You understand.
I understand his question. I can't comment. But I understand
Whether
that.
the mind
I
exists
understand that-
independently or not.
Mhm.
It is still the mind.
It
whether it's
exists.
Dependent origination or exists, still is what interprets however we interpret everything.
True.
Right, and that's where the schools agree. The mind is what is causing the problem.
He wants you to let him finish
I know,
uninterrupted.
I know, I'm
It's
sorry.
impossible.
It's really hard.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, now I lose my train of thought.
Yeah, okay.
So,
All right.
so I guess I'm asking is that either way, whether you say the mind exists independently or the mind exists dependently, the mind still is what interprets everything and creates whatever interpretation we have of anything,
Right,
okay?
right.
So so I guess See, now.
Well, okay, but Brian, you're right up to that point. And what I would add to it, the difference between Prasangika and Chittamatra, they're the same up to that point. But Prasangika then says, because the mind is not independently self-existing, the mind can actually change. The mind can create because of because of causes and conditions that come to it and it experiences. The mind can create a pathway that can change the state of the mind and bring it all the way to complete omniscient enlightenment. Whereas Chittamatra is saying, because the mind exists inherently, it is independently self-existence. There is nothing out there that is going to change the Chittamatrins' view.
So that the Chittamatrins believe in light.
I think yes, they do, but I think they are mistaken. They're mistaken about it. And which we will see as this is why this particular discourse between the Prasangikas and the Chittamatrins is so important and so difficult to fathom. And it wasn't until last night when I was trying to get this together at like 3 a.m. that I realized something I had never realized before. And it really made sense to me why Prasangika is the higher view than the Chittamatra. And hopefully you will come to that realization too. But it is important to discuss it and get out your thoughts, because that's what this is about, so that we can assess what these two schools are saying. So then I said at first glance, the difference in how these two schools arrive at their conclusions appear to be quite subtle, which is why it's important to fully understand how fundamentally different their processes of reasoning are. One view eventually leads to liberation from suffering, and one view eventually leads to isolation. Can you guess which one? Yeah.
The second, the one that we're not doing.
Yeah.
The one that we're not doing. The one that we're gonna kind of, but there are things about Chittamatra which are important to understand. And so, okay. So now this next part I have termed non-inherent existence versus non-existence. What's the difference between non-inherent existence and non-existence? Okay. When the Chittamatrins hear the Prasangikas assert that the mind and external objects lack any kind of inherent existence, they think the Prasangikas are saying the mind and external objects are non-existent because they have no inherent nature. In the Chittamatra system, to be inherently existent means to exist. And to be non-inherently existent means to not exist. This is completely different from what the Prasangika says.
Right.
So they're taking the same words and giving a different, they have a different understanding of what those words mean, which we all get.
Right. Right. A lot of people, that's what they think.
Yeah. All right. Because we misunderstand words ourselves. Therefore, the Chittamatrins don't understand how the Prasangikas can say that external objects don't exist inherently as they appear, and thus don't exist for the Chittamatrins, and then say that the mind that supposedly perceives them doesn't exist inherently either, and thus also doesn't exist according to the Chittamatra's reasoning. So, for the Chittamatrins, anything that appears to exist but doesn't actually exist must be an illusion. And you'd say that. Anything that appears to exist but doesn't actually exist must be an illusion.
Like a hologram.
That's because the Chittamatrins their definition of inherent existence is different than the Prasangika's definition of inherent existence. So here's stanza 15. Here's what the Chittamatrins is saying. If even that which is deceived, the mind, does not exist, what is it that sees illusions? The Chittamatrins are arguing here that if the consciousness that is deceived by the perceptions of non-existent illusions doesn't even exist itself, what is it then that does perceive illusions? The implication is here that nothing. Illusions aren't perceived by anything.
I was not here when you began, but if people are not aware of a core tenet of Chittamatra mind only, they hold to the fact that there's a thing called the mind basis of all that doesn't change.
Mhm.
So they come out of the chute, as it were, with a definition of the mind as, in effect, a permanent thing.
Yeah, we did say that, but it's really good to repeat it because I'm sure we
And
forgot.
so you have to listen to everything about Chittamatra with their ultimate belief. Essentially, they're grasping onto something,
Right.
whereas Prasangika does not grasp onto a unchanging permanent
It's
mind.
as if Chittamatra says the mind is a wave, and that wave exists, and I can grab onto it and hold onto it. It's inherently, independently, self-existing forever. That wave.
Right.
And Prasangika says, no. The wave is a dependent arising, comes and goes, and then there's another wave, and things just flow
Right.
in an interdependent way, but they do exist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It seems like the first one,
Chittamatra,
Thank you.
mind only.
no, not
Oh,
mind only.
Prasangika.
Yes. To me, as far as how it affects our life, and I mean, our study is that there's some meaning there, and I mean, the other one, it's like, it's nothing's real, nothing's real.
Except the mind.
Except the mind.
The mind is real.
Got it, okay. Never mind.
But everything, according to Chittamatra, is merely an appearance of the mind.
I think it's also important to mention as we discuss this, not only that core difference in Chittamatra, but also theoretically, we don't even know if there's a single human that holds to these views. These are labeled schools of philosophy that the Prasangikas came up with in order to dissect levels of belief.
Right.
And so, I mean, I wouldn't get all worked up going, geez, there are people out there who think this.
Well, there might be, I don't know, you know.
I think it would be wrong to, I mean, I think it's weird that they present this information in a way that well, all I know is my first experience many years ago was I kept thinking, oh, this is what we're supposed to believe. Oh, this is what we're supposed to believe. Oh, this is what, because it was like, why are we spending 5 weeks talking about something that we're gonna abandon? It was very confusing, and the monks were not clear about it.
It was very confusing. What Kavita is saying, if I can put it in another way, is that the schools of tenets represent a natural evolution of thought.
Mhm.
A natural evolution of thought. An evolution of thought that we ourselves have gone through and are going through now. An actual evolution of thought that goes step by step by step and keeps cutting away the mistakes. It's like it's very much a scientific process. You know, you
Have a theory.
you have a theory, you test the theory, you find the mistakes in the theory, then you because of those mistakes, you assert another theory, and you keep testing and testing until you find there is no flaw in that theory. That theory is perfectly functioning, which is what the Prasangika view has not been refuted.
Right.
It has not been refuted. So it represents for the Mahayana Buddhist schools the highest level of understanding of the nature of reality, including the self and all phenomena. Okay, so the Chittamatrins ask this question: if even that which is deceived, the mind, if the mind doesn't exist, then what is it that's seeing illusions? So the Prasangikas reply to this in stanza 16, and they say, but if for you, the Chittamatrins, if for the Chittamatrins, these same illusions have no being, in other words, these same illusions that you think that are out there externally are only in the mind. If these same illusions have no being, what indeed is there to be perceived? So let me sort of dissect this. The Prasangikas respond with the same argument that the Chittamatras use, but flip it. They flip it to the Chittamatra point of view. If, as the Chittamatrins say, external objects are illusory and have no reality because they're only in the mind, then even if they claim that the mind itself exists, what is it that could be perceived by the mind? If external objects don't actually exist externally, despite how they appear, then they would have to be completely devoid of their own inherent nature. And in the Chittamatra view, that would make them utterly non-existent. In that case, if the illusion itself is utterly non-existent, then there would be nothing to perceive. Then there would be nothing for the mind only to say this is just all an appearance of the mind. So what they're saying here is if the two poles of subject and object, if one of those poles doesn't exist, no perception can occur. You have a subject with actually no object. Or you have an object with nothing that's perceiving it.
Yeah.
Well, Chittamatra says the latter. You have a subject, but no object.
And yet it's saying, all these external appearances are in the mind only. But they're an illusion, and it says illusion. And if it's coming from the mind only, here's the thing, which you probably haven't thought about. Chittamatrins say that if something inherently exists, that means it exists. If something does not inherently exist, that means it doesn't exist and is an illusion. So when the Chittamatrins are saying all the appearances out there aren't the way they appear to you at all, they're not out there, they only exist in the mind. What they're saying is an inherently existing thing is saying that there's something that's like an illusion. But that illusion is coming from the inherently existing mind. So the Chittamatrins are kind of screwed up here. They're not seeing what they're actually doing. Do you understand that? Okay.
Bravo.
Okay.
I mean, really, bravo.
I understand.
So far.
I didn't understand it till last night.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, I just want to say Christopher's coming from a Prasangika conclusion. You know, if there was a hypothetical Chittamatras, they would not see his point. And,
Not at all, right?
you know, I mean, it's sort of like talking to a fundamentalist anything.
Yeah, I mean, once you decide something is inherently existent and it's fundamentally that way, it's very difficult to let go of it. We don't want to, none of us want to let go of that. We don't want to let go of the idea that I exist somehow independently, self-existing. And this is because they're saying since beginningless time we've been mistaken about this. And so it's very difficult to hear another view and to take it on board. It takes time, it takes reasoning, it takes logic, it takes having the right things being taught to you, and that they finally make sense to you. And I'm saying, like I said, Kavita and I have been studying for 17 years. It wasn't until last night that I came to some of these conclusions. So don't feel like I don't get what he's saying. I don't understand what's going on, because this is the way we all feel when we first hear this.
Right.
When the Geshe, Drakpa, and Lama were teaching us the tenets, we were just scratching our heads. Like, what are they talking about? I don't understand a word they're saying. You know? But give it time. Take a long view of it.
Right.
You know, step by step by step. Okay. To this. Okay. So then we go on. the Chittamatrins respond to the Prasangikas saying, if if these two poles don't exist, if there's only an inherently existing subject, but this appearance actually is an illusion, then you don't have it. There's nothing, you don't have a perception of an object and an object that's being perceived. It's kind of like screwed up. So the Chittamatrins just respond to this. They respond to this. They hear what the Prasangikas are saying. And in stanza 16, they say, but objects have another mode of being. That very mode is the mind itself.
And this is
So the mode of
Chittamatra.
being of this is the mind itself. And everything else. That's what the Chittamatrins are saying. So the Chittamatrins say that yes, in reality, phenomena do not exist externally as they appear. They're agreeing. All possible existing phenomena are of the nature of the subjective mind, the subjective consciousness. They exist as substances of the subjective consciousness, substances of the mind that's apprehending the substances of the mind. In other words, they're saying the mind is sort of cognizing, the mind is cognizing itself. It's both subject and objects, is what they're saying.
Right,
Well,
and it can't be.
Right, I know.
No, because
Do you want to get through this first and then?
I don't know if I would get through it.
Okay, go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, I'm kind of just tell you this.
Speak up for the online people.
So the Prasangikas say to the Chittamatrins, if it's an illusion, there's nothing there that to see or exist. So you can't see something that's an illusion, basically is what they said, if I understand what you said.
They're saying,
You have a subject and no object. The object's an illusion. So
Right.
therefore you can't observe it. Okay. Well, Prasangikas say, yeah, everything's an illusion because it's the same thing in our life because there's nothing that exists independently, and so it looks to us like it does, but it's still an illusion.
okay, that's not what the Prasangikas actually say. The Prasangikas do not say, this is an illusion. They say, this appears to exist from its own side independently. But in fact, it is a dependent arising based on many, many causes and conditions, and it is interdependent with everything. Actually, when you analyze and go far,
So
you're going to find a connection to the beginning of the universe from this pillow, as you will find also from our own consciousness. Because it's dependent arising. And it exists. It is illusion-like, but it is not an illusion. It's not actually an illusion.
It does exist.
well, it doesn't exist.
It
It does exist. It exists interdependently.
But it's constantly changing. So how can
That's
it
right.
exist?
That's the mode of existence. Things exist interdependently and are constantly changing like a wave. The wave exists. It's not an illusion. Our problem is we try to superimpose permanence onto everything. We try to say this exists separately. Brian and Tracy and Molly, they're all separate existing things. The piano is a separate thing. That's where we're mistaken.
Yeah, I understand that.
But Prasangika is saying it does exist, but the mode of existence is not clear to us. The mode of existence is that everything is constantly changing, is constantly arising and being influenced by other causes and conditions. Everything is interdependent, interconnected, and it's always changing. That is actually great news.
So again, if it's always changing, then how can you say it ever exists?
Because it,
Because that's the mode of existence. It's just how do you define existence?
Well, I don't
If
know.
one defines existence as something that's permanent and will never change, that's just a definition of a mode of existence. But you can also have a definition of the mode of existence that says existence is something that
So
constantly
maybe let
change.
me ask the question differently. So the Chittamatras and Prasangikas, can they,
Speak up.
the Chittamatrins and the Prasangikas, can they agree that they have a definition about the same thing that actually is the same thing, but they define it differently? Does that make sense?
Well, you'd have to say that.
I think that is what.
I think that's what's going on. Yeah.
As well.
I think that's what's going on, because when we,
They agree that we look at things and we see things that may not be exactly what we're interpreting, what we're seeing, that there's, a mistaken view. They agree on that, but how the view is mistaken is where they differ.
yeah,
The Chittamantras say one thing, the Prasangikas say another. And like, in this example, that pillow exists, but it doesn't exist independently. It exists because there was a weaver weaving. It exists because there was a farmer growing cotton that then was spun into the fabric that, the plants, the bugs.
and it goes all the way back to the origin of the universe and beyond.
Right, but the pillow does exist,
so-
and it is forever changing, because the cotton will break down, the fibers will, if it's used all the time, it will break down more quickly.
And that's the way we are too.
So is it fair to say, well,
I like that. Is it fair to say, well,
well, is it
Yeah, I think it's fair to
is
say.
it fair to say
Exactly.
that, I mean, I would think that even in the Chittamatrin school, they would recognize that things degrade, things change over eons, centuries, whatever.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so.
But they're
nothing-
saying that's only in the mind
Not out there.
that it's happening. It's the only inherently existing thing is the mind.
Right, so what I'm,
Prasangikas say there is no inherently existing
I
thing.
guess what I'm trying to get at, maybe it's a moot point, or it's not that terribly important. When you read stanza 15, I think, or 16, I can't remember which one it was, and the Prasangika said to the Chittamatrins, well, it's an illusion,
That's 16.
16, therefore you can't see an illusion. And I'm saying it's not really a difference of opinion, because that will degrade over time. It will change over time. So that the Chittamatrins will say, if I leave it out for 100 years and come back, it won't be the same as it was when I first left it out. Right, so it's not independently existing because it does change.
But it's a changing only in the mind of the Chittamatra, of the Chittamatrin. See that in the Chittamatrin system is a closed system. It's a closed system. It's like a,
You have to inject, and by the way, we got feedback from our online participants that it's very frustrating.
yeah, and I talked about that.
Okay, so please do speak up.
We're going from
Talk louder.
Yeah.
But
It may
I
be
mean,
taken
you
back.
have to, a major part of this whole analysis has to also include the duality of subject and object, and this is in the end, the fundamental division between Prasangika and Chittamatra.
Mhm.
Chittamatra is saying there's mind only and mind is permanent. Prasangika is
inherently
saying,
existing.
Prasangika is saying there is a observer, the subject is the way they put it, and the object, the phenomenon that you're going to apprehend.
Okay,
However, Prasangika goes a lot further in their analysis of what that means, but you have to at least get to that before you then can, in some ways, collapse what I just said, because that is not the ultimate way Prasangika would explain it, but that's where they pull out from
All right.
Chittamatra.
we're about to go exactly there to the subject object thing.
Okay, go.
Okay, and let me finish. This was 16, where Chittamatrins say, but objects have another mode of being. That very mode is but the mind itself. So they say all possible existing phenomena are of the nature of the subjective mind. Like I said, they exist as substances of the mind that apprehends them. According to the Chittamatra theory, external things are not completely non-existent. They are not entirely one and the same as the mind because they lack the characteristics of consciousness. Yet neither are they something that by nature is separate from the mind. Therefore, they can't be expressed as being either mind or separate from mind. They say that it is inexpressible, like an elephant we see in a dream. It appears to be an exterior thing, but is in fact an aspect of the mind itself. The part that I found interesting about this is the Chittamatrins say the reason why these external, what appear to be external phenomena to us, are not the same as the mind itself, is because this external phenomena have no consciousness. So in other words, Chittamatrins are saying, I'm the only one who has consciousness here. All the rest of you is just me imputing consciousness onto this appearance that I don't know, manufacturing? It's very interesting where it goes on from here and the debate that occurs. It has to do with subject and object. So the next section I've called, can the mind cognize itself? Okay, this is the discussion now. So the Prasangika in stanza 17, where are we now time-wise? We're gonna have to leave immediately, stop immediately at 12:30 because Kabir and I have the same day turnaround at the big cabin. And okay, the Prasangikas say in stanza 17, but if the mirage is the mind itself, what is then perceived by what? The Buddha himself has said that the mind cannot be seen by mind.
Right.
In just the same way he has said, the sword's edge cannot cut the sword. So the problem here, as the Prasangikas see it, is that if the perceived illusory object is all in the mind, and in fact is the mind itself, what object is being seen by what subject? In other words, if all you out there, everything out there is my mind, appearance of my mind, well, what object is being seen by what subject? Are you the subject and I'm the object, or am I the object and you the subject? Because it's all my mind. Okay, so the Chittamatrins are pointing this out. I mean, the Prasangikas are pointing this out. Sorry, the Prasangikas. So the Chittamatrins maintain that the mind is of the same nature as the object that it's apprehending. If the subject and object are identical, the Prasangikas say, how can anything be seen by anything? This is explaining the stanza. The Buddha himself has said that the mind cannot see the mind.
Right.
Just as the sword's edge cannot cut itself. This is even in a sutra by the Buddha. Just as the fingertip can't touch itself,
Right.
just as the acrobat can't stand on their own shoulders, the mind cannot perceive itself. Buddhist scripture refutes the possibility of a self-cognizing mind or consciousness that is able to apprehend itself. And I found these two scriptures that the commentaries alluded to. It's called the Lankavatara Sutra and the Ratnachuta Paripricha Sutra. And in those sutras, the Buddha states that the mind does not perceive itself. Quote, it is thus, just as the blade cannot cut itself and the fingertip cannot touch itself, even so the mind itself cannot see the mind. So that's coming from the Buddha, the enlightened being. That's not the commentary, that's the actual sutra. Those are the actual words of the Buddha. So they're relying, the Prasangikas are relying on what they call scriptural authority. When the scriptural authority means the Buddha said it. You know, so here the important point that that the Prasangikas are refuting is the Chittamatra view of a self-cognizing mind. So the important point that they're refuting is that as long as the mind is held to be inherently self-existent, as the Chittamatrins assert it is, it can't be dependent upon parts. It has to be partless and one. If something is independently self-existing, how can it have parts that it's depending on to exist? This is why the Prasangikas say there is nothing,
Right.
nothing that is independently self-existing. In such a case, so this undermines the idea that it could be that a consciousness could be divided into both a seen object and a seeing subject. The one that this one thing, the consciousness can be both the seen object and the seeing subject. In such a case, both the subject and object would be exactly the same thing, one state of consciousness, and it would be impossible to make a distinction between subject and object. So logical reasoning refutes such a mode of existence. It's like I was saying, if my mind was one thing, and inherently one thing, and all of you out there and everything that's out there was my mind, then who's to say that everything that's out there isn't observing me? Isn't that my mind?
It'd be better, Ellie, for you.
The subject and the object are the same thing, which is who's looking at what?
You're
Right.
Okay. So now we go to a section that I'm calling, why can't the mind cognize itself? So the Chittamatrins dispute this idea that the Prasangikas just talked about by saying, why shouldn't the mind know itself? In stanza 18, they say, it's like the flame that perfectly illuminates itself. That's what the stanza says. So what they're saying is, just as the flame of a lamp illuminates the surrounding darkness, at the same time, that flame perfectly is illuminating itself. In a similar way, the Chittamatrins say, the mind is able to be conscious of both itself and other phenomena, like the flame. It's illuminating itself, the Chittamatrins say, and it's illuminating everything around it. Prasangikas now come back in stanza 19, and they say, the flame, in fact, can never light itself. And why? Because the darkness never dims it. So let's explore what Prasangika is saying here. They're saying that the Chittamatrins are making the implied assumption that if a flame couldn't illuminate itself, it wouldn't be able to illuminate anything else. But to say that a flame illuminates itself is just a conventional expression. It's not strictly true. The light of a flame doesn't illuminate itself at all. Think about it. Since there is no darkness in a flame, think about it. There is no darkness in a flame. It has no need of illumination. The flame has no need to be illuminated. What is there in a flame that needs to be illuminated? If one were to apply then this same logic that the Chittamatrins were using with a flame and apply it to darkness, it would follow that just as a flame illuminates itself, so darkness darkens itself. But since darkness is the absence of light, it has no need to obscure itself. What is there in darkness that needs to be darkened? Just like what is there in a flame that needs to be illuminated? If darkness actually did darken itself, it would follow that when an object such as a pot was placed in darkness that was darkening itself, it would be the darkness itself that couldn't be seen while the pot would remain visible, which is absurd. So neither a flame illuminates itself, nor does darkness darken itself. The flame is of the nature of light. Darkness is of the nature of being dark. But the Chittamatrins object to this line of reasoning by saying, in the context they are discussing, the illuminator and that which is illuminated are not two separate things. They say the flame illuminates itself by its very nature, just in the same way that a lapis lazuli gemstone is blue in and of itself by its very nature. So here's stanza 19. The Chittamatrins says, the blueness of a thing by nature blue depends, unlike a crystal, upon nothing else. So what are they saying? The Chittamatrins are saying that a distinction can be made in the way things are blue. There is a blue color that arises in dependence on external factors, such as when a clear piece of crystal is placed on top of a blue cloth, the clear crystal looks blue. It's dependent on other factors. On the other hand, there is a blue color, the Chittamatrins say, which exists independently of any outside condition, as in the case of lapis lazuli, which is blue by nature. And then the Chittamatrins in stanza 20 say, in the same way, some perceptions come from other things, while some do not. So the Chittamatrins are arguing, just as there is one kind of thing that depends on an external factor, and another kind of thing that is independent of any outside condition, such as the lapis lazuli, so are some perceptions. Like the perceptions of the eye consciousness, they're dependent upon external objects such as form, while others, like the perceptions of the self-cognizing consciousness, are focused inward and perceive their awareness only. In stanza 20, the Prasangikas come back and say, but something that's by nature blue has never of itself imposed blueness on its non-blue self. What this is saying, Prasangikas are saying that the example of the blueness of a lapis lazuli being independent of any outside condition is not valid. It's evident that the blueness of lapis lazuli doesn't exist without depending upon anything else. It's dependent upon causes and conditions. It would be like saying the color of a person's skin doesn't depend on anything else.
Right.
They just are inherently the color they are. When we all know that's not true at all. Persons of a colored skin depends on what color their parents' skin was. I mean, it's everything is a dependent arising. There is no inherently existing blueness of a thing.
And the environment you're in.
Yeah. So that's the logic that the Prasangika is applying to the Chittamatra's view there. So the discourse then returns to the previous example of the flame of the lamp, because I don't think the Chittamatra had anything to say about that.
Right.
So in stanza 21, it says, the phrase, the lamp illuminates itself, the mind can know and formulate. But what is there to know and say that mind is self-illuminated? So that's the stanza. Here's what the stanza is saying. When the Chittamatrins say, the flame of a lamp illuminates itself, this is understood and expressed in terms of someone who can observe that flame. It's a mind that is distinct from the flame. The reason we can say, the reason we know, the reason we agree that a flame does not illuminate itself is that as a subject, and we look at the object, the flame, we can see, well, in the flame, there's no darkness there. So how could it possibly be illuminating itself? It's just itself the nature of illumination. That's what it is. It's an illuminated thing. So we're talking about subject and object. That's how we arrived at that conclusion that a flame cannot illuminate itself. But when the Chittamatrins say the mind illuminates or knows itself, what is exactly the state of a mind that can do this? is that which knows the mind to be self-illuminating identical with the mind? Is it the same thing? Or is it some other mind that knows this? If the mind is like a flame that is in its nature illuminating, as the Chittamatrins say, then they should assert that the mind is not self-knowing, but is merely in its nature, like a flame, aware and knowing. It's like the flame doesn't know itself that it's self-illuminated. It's that it's in the nature of illumination. The flame just is in the nature of illumination. It's not reflecting back on itself, saying, I am in the nature of, illumination. It's only through subject and object that we can come to that conclusion. But if the Chittamatrins say the mind is self-cognizing and able to perceive and know itself, then there has to be a method by which the mind is able to observe itself, similar to how we're able to look at an image of ourselves in a mirror. We can't with our own eyes turn around and see our face. We have a method of seeing our face, and that's by looking at a reflection of it. So it becomes then subject and object again. There's a subject and object. There's the reflective thing back and forth. So
And this is the Prasangikas.
that's the Prasangikas saying. So they're saying there has to be a method that the mind can look at itself the way we look at ourselves in a mirror. If that were the case, then and this is crazy. But if that were the case, if the mind could actually look at itself, reflect back and forth, and it was the same mind, if that were the case, then the consciousness or the mind would have to produce moment to moment an endless series of substantially different consciousnesses to be conscious of one another, like mirroring streams of consciousness. Now, when Geshe Drakpa first told us this, I didn't know what he was talking about. Do you remember this at all? He talked to, there would be an endless succession of consciousness knowing itself if this was the case, if it could actually do it. And I sat there like sort of like Ryan, going, I don't even know what he's saying.
And this is Chittamatra.
Chittamatra is saying that
It's
the mind can perceive itself, but Prasangika is saying, if that's the case, if the mind could actually look at itself, it would have to sort of reproduce itself moment to moment, so that you had two streams of consciousness that could observe one another at the same time.
Right.
They'd have to be simultaneous. And basically, I think it's probably impossible. I think that, let's see.
It isn't how things exist.
It's not the way things exist. Let me see what we have 3 minutes. Let me just see what
Yeah.
the next stanza says. So this is the Chittamatras now talking. They're saying in the stanza, the mind indeed is never seen by anything. And therefore, whether it can know or not know itself, it's like the beauty of a barren woman's daughter, something that is pointless to discuss. So in other words, the Prasangikas assert that if the moment-to-moment dependently arising continuum of consciousness is never perceived by anything, whether by itself or by a mirroring continuum of consciousness distinct from it, it's meaningless to examine and talk about whether it's self-knowing or not. To discuss the characteristics of something which is never perceived is as futile as discussing the beauty of a barren woman's daughter. It's completely meaningless. So the Chittamatrins, there's no way they can logically prove that the consciousness can actually do this. So the Prasangikas is saying, why are we even talking about it?
Right.
It's like talking about, a barren woman's beautiful daughter. It doesn't exist. It's pointless to even discuss this, is what they're saying. So that's where we'll have to stop.
Yeah.
Any questions on that one? This will be all posted.
No, there are no questions. We don't have time.
All right.
No, it would be,
It's such a
I mean,
It's a lot to think about.
look, I think if you're seriously interested in this topic, some independent reading on these things.
Yeah. What I would suggest the commentaries, but I'd also suggest looking at this, because what I've tried to do is put the commentaries into words that we can kind of understand.
Mhm.
But even so, plan on it taking years to really get a grasp of what this is saying, because according to the Buddha, from beginningless time, we've had this habitual propensity to have a wrong view. And so it's like, I don't know what it would be like. It's being told to us, but we're saying, this does not compute. This does not compute,
Right,
because our computer
just can't.
doesn't have the RAM to take that in.
Right, yeah. You'd update the software.
We have to update the software,
Which is what. Trying to.
Which is
I-
what-
happens.
what
I
the
think,
Dharma
evolution
is. The
and
Dharma
progress.
is updating our software
Yeah,
so that we can, but that's a gradual thing. You know,
Right.
sometimes it takes hours for the software to update.
yes.
If it happens too fast, it gets fried.
And if it happens too fast, it gets fried. Exactly. Okay, let's do our dedication first, so we don't lose any merit that we may have gained from this. That we may have gained. So let's do the two dedication prayers, the Jangshub Semchok and the Tongye. May the Bodhi mind continue to grow, and may the view of emptiness continue to grow. Okay. Jangshub Semchok Rinpoche Makye Panam Pyegyo Chi Panyampa Me Payam Gong Ne Gong Du Pewar Shok Tong Ye Tawa Rinpoche Makye Panam Pyegyo Chi Panyampa Me Payam Gong Ne Gong Du Pewar Shok. All right, then.
Thank you, Christopher.
You're welcome. I hope it's helpful.
Well, Christopher, I found it hugely helpful, so thank you so
Oh.
much.
Great, Anne. Thank you. Thank you. And I will post at least, what we discussed here on, so can review it yourself, and probably I'll also give the names of some of the commentaries that I'm using. So if you choose to, you can look at those. But I'll tell you, the commentary by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and B. Allen Wallace is like code.
Yeah, oh,
And,
like code.
yeah. And I mean, I'm starting to not understand their lingo, but it takes a while and getting into it and looking at the other commentaries to understand what the code is saying,
Right.
to understand what they're saying. It's an incredible thing. All right, I'm going to end the recording. Bye bye, everybody.